bedding areas, there's a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of strategies, a lot of different beliefs on what makes a bedding area powerful. And I get a lot of questions on how people find and research and see my hub style bedding design that I've coined. And we're always learning. I'm always adding things to it. I'm always trying to tweak it just a little bit and bringing that to you guys. And I was recently chatting with a gentleman about maybe going into a little bit detail of what in like these the timber versus a switchgrass setting as far as these bedding areas, as far as my hub style designs, how they look, what they represent when you're really zoomed down in on tight on them. In my designs, obviously we use Onyx Hunt, and what you guys will see is when I create these hub style designs, obviously it's built off a hub, like we said, kind of that hand design, and I'm able to write in there, design in there these red lines. Those red lines are corridors or transition areas, but what does it look like when you see it, when you're there on top of it or in an aerial? So we've got time today, and I wanted to go in a little bit more in depth in that. I'm able to show you this now on the new iPad, to go with two camera angles here, if you will, to really give you an inside look on how far apart they should be, what's inside of them. We're going to start with the timber, creating one like a bedding area, hub style bedding area closer to your, not on, but closest to your food plots, let's say, making these doe bedding areas. These hub style bedding areas that I create, guys, when they're closer to the bedding areas, they are the doe bedding areas. The reason is like we've always talked, you put those does up there closer, you don't have to beat the nose of those does in the evening, and you don't have to beat the nose of all of that drama in the evening, and it creates a separation from these buck beds, creates depth. That's why you see me putting these out there. I don't ever put them on it. I don't believe in putting these bedding areas directly on the food source. But with that said, what do they look like? Timber versus switchgrass. And I actually just made an offer on a parcel. Hopefully this goes through, so I can give you a little more in-depth on as far as the switchgrass side of it out in the field, and how you can take a farm that's what I always say is kind of these bypass farms, these overlooked farms, I guess is what they are, that you can buy pretty reasonable, and you can turn them into, if they're in the right areas, you can turn them into a mature whitetail buck mecca, because you're drawing in bucks from all over the area, and that's key. A lot of things come with that: pressure, know-how, keeping those areas right, making it right. But back to the bedding here. I'm going to zoom down in. We're going to start with the timber, and I'm going to zoom down in on that, and I'm going to kind of show you how I create what's in there, how to make sure these areas are right, and then we're going to switch, and we're going to go to the into the switchgrass, into a field portion of it, and kind of show you a more in-depth look here, from what I can do from above, and then add some, obviously some footage that I've got from these bedding areas that are in these situations that I have created already, and kind of give you a few tips along the way. So we're going to switch here to the some vision from above here, if you will, on the iPad, and show you a few tips. So starting with these hubs, these first initial hubs that you see me designing, guys, these hubs are the start of these hubs are a center point, if you will. You want these created that these are obviously this style, and these are 30 40 yards wide into a circle, let's say, and that's open. The only thing in there is, though, sometimes I only leave is I'll go right in the center of them, obviously, and maybe we'll leave a spot for a licking branch or something like that. But this is the line of movement that you're trying to create. That line of movement is going out towards these fields. We're going to use this is a pole line right here, but we're going to use this as the food plot. So you see I'm off the edge of the food plot, and the reason is you want these does to get up out of these bedding areas, and you want them to go, you're focusing this attention out to the food plots. Now, obviously, if these does are not being able to get up out of these doe bedding areas, or if they're on the edge, they just get up and go out. You're not creating these. You're not creating the movement that triggers these. That just triggers deer, movement in general, as far as mature bucks or any deer movement. It's very it's very much like ourselves in the human world, is when somebody one person in a household gets up and starts moving around. You're making noise in a house. It's just a natural instinct on the human side. The same goes for the deer, as far as getting up on your feet and getting the day started. And that's the same the same rhythm that you have here. So what we do, starting with these hubs, I always have these questions on here, is what is these hubs? These hubs are going to be about from top to bottom. They're about 15 or 20 yards wide is what this circle is, from top to bottom here, guys. And what that is it's pretty open. So if there's anything in here that you need to have, obviously this is an edge, you're creating it, so you're creating this line of movement out and back in. Obviously, in the mornings, these deer are going to come back into this as well. So these hubs are about 15 to 20 yards, and you open them up, and it's pretty much a circle. You're opening them up, and like I said, you can leave a a licking branch right here in the center of it, create a scrape or whatever the case is. Then from there, what you're doing is you're creating a line. This main line is what goes out here to your buck bedding, and we're going to use this, and we're going to, on this one here, we're going to say that, the farther away the better, so we can create a way to get in here from side access to hunt. But I'm going to show you this center line is actually the most predominant of your hub style design. You want to create this, and obviously we're using a little bit straighter lines here, but you can move them around. But you want to create this center line. This center line is what actually encompasses and comes down into your buck bedding. So this is your line of travel that you're creating for your buck to be able to scent check these bedding areas. But in here we've got that is the center line, obviously. So in here, it's not, like I said before, it's not just a center, it's not just a line, that's a trail. These are actually very very in depth as far as what is inside of them. So we're going to zoom down in here a little bit tighter. These here are going to be where you want to create these. This line right here is obviously about 5 yards wide, and we're making this extreme here so you can really get the feel for it. But this is open. This line of travel is open, and this is where these you're creating these obviously get opened right up. Anything inside of this gets taken out. So whether that's mature timber, whether that's taller brush that's not that's above the that's outside of that feeding spectrum now, where they're not gaining browse, that's gone. It's gone. You take it out. So all of these corridors, and what you're trying to do, guys, is you're trying to create new browse and new growth in here. So when they're moving out of these, we'll design here, they're eating and they're meeting those browse requirements on their way out, but not holding. They're not enough in here to hold them. It's just a way to meet their requirements. They are on their feet and heading out towards these ag fields. They have to be able to meet their requirements, and inside of these, obviously you don't have food plots inside these bedding areas, so where they get those requirements is inside of this browse, eating this browse inside of this bedding area. So what we do is we're going to create a couple legs here. So that tells you that these are 5 they're 5 5 yards wide, and we just make these. We don't ever dead end them, but they're open. And this is the same way. They're open at the end, and if there's not enough browse in that line, what we do is or side cover, we implement a few pine trees. What I do is I like to hide a couple of spruce in here, and this is a video coming up, but I'll hide a spruce in here, and then we'll also put we'll stagger one. And what that does is we're going to have a video coming here, that shows you that how to create wind blocks for these deer. But anyway, that's what's in here. So there's nothing in here when you first create these. So it opens it up, and you're creating that daylight to get to these forest floors. Then what you do is you come off this one as well, and we're going to create another one right along the side of this swamp that we have here, and we do the same thing there. You just end them, and what this is, guys, at the end is this is the transition, the corridor area of this hub style design. This is the corridor leading to the hub that angles the deer back out to the feeding. In this situation, this is a doe bedding. Same deal here. The reason that I open them up on the end is because you're not only being able to stack deer along inside of these, but you want this to be a corridor. You want the bedding to be outside of these in a timber aspect. You don't want the bedding to be internal of these. You want this to be an area where they funnel back out to and go. And I'll show you how that ties together. But anyway, this is open at the end. Same theory. You can put some, if you don't have them, put some spruce in here, or transplant, transplant some of that Russian olive. If it's a low area, obviously come in and put some red osier dogwood, whatever the case is. Then what we're going to do, so now you have your hub, your initial step of the hub designed. Then what I like to do, guys, is the reason for that is I go in here and I create, I don't ever like dead ending these. So what I do is I create these, this arch. I call it the arch. You create this arch in these bedding, this hub style bedding. So what you're doing is you're now opening up all of this internal here is now open as well. So recap on the timber side of here, the corridors are 5 feet wide. So if you lay these out with a paint can and you go through and you create this hub, everything inside on that center line, like I've said before, gets cut. These get cut out. Anything in your line that you're making gets cut out, and it creates a corridor. So yes, they are open. There's nothing in them initially, but your reason that you're taking it out is you're creating edge, and you're creating a new growth in there, and you're creating a corridor, helping aid in movement back out towards the fields. So that's how they look. This is how it's just a little better design now that I've got the iPad in order, be able to show you how wide they're open. That's the timber side of it. Now we're going to go look at the switchgrass side of it out in a field setting, and how you can, make both of these very, very powerful. So this, guys, is a property that I have designed here recently, and I'm just going to use this one as a way to show you what you can create out in a field setting. Obviously, you can see this is a 40-acre parcel, and this is a dirt road here to the east, this being north, and you can see there's ag. This whole chunk through here this is the neighboring. This is actually a fence line right through here, right on the top here. But what you can see is this is all ag now, and so this is a 40-acre parcel. There's 8 acres of swamp mixed woods here, and there's a area here that could be developed into a pond, or whatever. But this is a water. This is standing water right here. It's only 4, 5, 6 inches deep right now, but it all kind of just tapers into this. So you can see these fields are in a rolling setting out here in the fields. This just kind of tapers in. This is low wetland. But back to what we were talking about as far as switchgrass, this is a perfect farm to realize what the power of these hub style bedding areas and what's internal of them. And now I'm able to, like I said, with the new software here, I'm able to show you a little bit of more in depth about how these are created, and the reason that you can use these in a timber and also in the out in the field. And like I was saying before, is these farms are a lot of these farms are overlooked just because of the fact that you're using them as a you look at them as a grass field that can never be transferred into anything, and that is why these are so powerful, and can be. So this is all switchgrass. Everything in yellow here, guys, is obviously switchgrass all the way around this whole design. This is actually a 2-track. This is how you would enter. This one I didn't add the other line to it, but this is how you enter the food plots. So you don't anywhere that these tracks are, you want these to be these 2 tracks obviously to tie into to hunting locations, so you just don't have trails all over here. But going into the what's internal of them, you can see this is a way to show you this is switchgrass, so it's just not a mass of switchgrass with a line that's a foot trail through these. I've had that question, these red lines that you have and you're creating here look like it's just a foot trail. Can you explain to me why or what that is or what's inside of these? So what we do, guys, is these are the same way as the timber. These are 5-foot openings. This one here obviously comes into the food plot. This white diagram here, these are food plots. These are hub style bedding designs that I put on both sides to create more doe bedding and to help in aid of to creating some buck bedding on this property. But this is the look at them. So inside of here you can see these are open. Same theory as kind of the timber. You go in and these are 5-foot openings. Whether you create, you plant this whole area to switchgrass and then you come in and create these. What I like to do is to save money is I create these first and then plant the switchgrass in those areas after, so you don't waste the money on the switchgrass. But it just kind of depends on what you've got, whether the switchgrass or set aside grass is already there, you're adding to it, you're drilling into it, or you're creating this from scratch. But inside of these guys, you can see this is 5 foot 5 foot wide. And what I'm doing now, and if we get the parcel that I'm hoping to get here, you can see what I'm going to do is I've done it in the past on a small privately owned piece that I have, but I'm going to do this, enhance this a little more. These openings in a field setting, obviously there has to be something in them, so it's just not dirt. What I like to do is I use pig manure as one thing you can do. You can hand plant trees or whatever you want in here, but you have to promote growth. You're promoting growth in these. You're transitioning this ag field into habitat, whitetail habitat. So this has to be, it can't be just a dirt line because there has to be something in there. Now you're placing bedding out here. Now you have to meet their browse intake needs. So what I do is one trick that I've got is I actually take and implement spread with a little manure spreader, or you can do it by hand. But I actually take hog manure and place in here, pig manure. And the reason is you get pigweed. Pigweed's thick. It stands up very, very, very well to conditions as far as snow, just as the switchgrass does. But if you come in here and you spread this in here, it doesn't take very much. You get a good base of pigweed created. What you'll find is that is a way to thicken these areas up, because it'll be green underneath it. Has some green vegetation, and then it'll also have cover. That pigweed gets 3, 4, 5 feet tall, and it creates cover. These are transition areas, getting these deer back into. This is a buck transition area, getting them out and around the doe bedding area. But inside these doe bedding areas, it's the same way as the timber, but you have to go in here and cut little lines into these pockets. Plant some spruce trees in here, whatever the case is, and create these does to be able to go inside of these bedding areas, these corridors or these pockets, if you will. Put a couple spruce trees in here. Hand trim a foot trail into it. Make these little corridors these little pockets private, and all this foot travel, these deer foot travel, will obviously come back out, hit these corridors, and that moves them in the right direction. Like we've always said, the whole reason of these hub style designs is to focus the deer attention back out where you want it. So you can see here we don't have these all entering into a food plot at one spot, because that would create way too much drama. I have 1, 2, 3 ways for these does to enter this food plot. So you're going to have a pocket of them here feeding, you're going to have some of them here, you're going to have some of them up in here, and it keeps especially on a L-shaped food plot like this here, it keeps the deer, these does away from each other. You could have does down here feeding, and they would never see these does here on this north-south portion of this food plot. But in here, obviously, you can see that I've got plans to put some, soft mast, some apple trees in here with some corridors through the center of it, just to create some movement and meet some more, intake requirements. But in here, so 5 feet wide, like a tiller width, you go in here, like I said, whether you plant the switchgrass before or not, you go in here and you create this arch, and you start promoting growth. You know, you get your hands on some hardwood seed, or you know, you go out and you transplant if this is lower. You know, depending on the how high out of that water table that your fields are, you start you know, creating browse. You got to get browse in here. You got to get these deer something to eat along the way. You got to get them something to eat inside this bedding area. If they don't have anything inside of a bedding area to eat, it's not a bedding area. They're going to go somewhere else. It could be the coolest looking bedding area that you've ever designed, but if there's nothing in there to eat, so that's why we implement cover. We also implement you know, I start putting anything that I can do outside of, do not plant these corridors to the same thing that are in your food plots. Obviously, then they're just going to get up and stay inside of those. You know, don't plant them to oats or rye or brassicas or anything like that. It has to be, you have to start creating, because this is a, what you're trying to do, guys, is this is a new design. You're taking ag and making it into whitetail habitat. So what you're doing is you want to create these areas into you know, habitat that you can maintain for years to come. So at the end of it, you make these pockets. Like I said, you might add a couple spruce trees at the end of each one of these. You know, add some spruce trees in here to kind of give them a wind block, shelter, and then cut little trails into it. You know, just foot trails into it so they can get in and hide themselves in here. And it's individual pockets, so it makes it, you know, they can get away from each other. But when the time of the day comes, and that you know, you're looking at that third feeding of the day, that hour before dark, in an evening setting, they get up and they move back through these corridors and they go. This is the hub that we designed. Obviously, I showed you in the timber before, an area. In this situation, these are, you know, the bigger the parcel, you can move these back and then create the hubs. With this being only 40 acres, I put these out on, I started them on the food plot, but the deer aren't bedding right directly on the edge of the food plot. None of this right here will be you know, lines into this or trails into this. If they naturally do that themselves, then that's fine, but I'm not going to go in here and create you know, create a bunch of bedding right in here. I'm going to put it inside of this, so they still have to get up and move out. The best way that I like to do it, obviously, is like a timber setting where you move this back, and then you know, you start this hub back a little bit. But the smaller the parcel, the closer you have to move this to your feed. And sometimes it's you know, you put the initial hub not too far off that destination feed location, but you keep this bedding back behind it. So inside of these guys, like, you know, as a recap, you know, it's 5 feet wide. You open these up, all of these transition areas, or these corridors. This is a transition area, obviously, and it goes up into a, you know, any time that it goes past your blinds, it's now a transition area. It's not a corridor at that time. That's a transition area getting from buck bedding to this is a little tight here, but as far as distances, but you know, this might be 100 you know, 100 yards, 80 yards, but you got to keep in mind this is a solid wall of grass, so you're easy to get in here. If you wanted to, you know, help the situation out a little bit more, so you knew you wouldn't get busted, then what you'd do is you would create you know, you'd plant some Egyptian wheat along this edge here, you know, to create some more noise, sound barrier, and visual barrier to get in and out of the stand. But inside of those, like I said, you know, you take that manure. It really helps get that generated, get that stem count, and it's not, you know, obviously they're not going to eat the dead pigweed, but they're going to eat the new growth of pigweed. If you've ever noticed, I'll show you some pictures here of a one that I've got, and some even down here in the old hog lot here. You'll see that this pigweed grows, and they'll eat the pigweed initially when it's green, but as it gets taller, obviously it dies, and it just becomes cover at that point. It just becomes a structure inside of these bedding areas, and then you've got new growth underneath it, and each year it just keeps growing up, and they keep eating it, but it turns into it's got a hard stem count, a stem density, I guess I should say, at the base of it, and it just creates, it kind of turns into a browse, a woody substance at that point, I guess I should say. The trick is, though, is you have to create some browse in here. You have to get something for them to eat other than just the, you know, pigweed, or obviously they're not going to eat all spruce by putting spruce in these pockets, something like that. You have to give them something. You have to meet their browse requirements inside of these bedding areas, or like we said, it's not a great bedding area. You know, these bedding areas, these hub designs can be the prettiest, coolest looking thing in the world, but if they don't have browse, they're not they're not meeting your browse intake. In other words, they're not bedding areas. They're going to be bedding somewhere else, and they're just going to be using these as a hideaway, let's say at night, to get away from things that keep bumping them off a field or predators or whatever. So I'll end this on this: is anytime that you create these and you plant these, now these are maintainable. Whatever you put into these, you can come back in here 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when that these the wood browse that did grow, the hardwood regeneration that popped up, the popple that you can that you'll get to come back up in these, whatever that case is, that's you're going to get to grow inside of these hub style bedding areas. The coolest thing is about these, though, is you can maintain it. The great thing is you can come back into these areas with your brush hog, because that's about exactly the width that they are, about 5-6 feet wide, with a brush hog every 3-4 years, and get that browse back down. Don't mow it. You don't have to mow it to the dirt, but mow it down into that 4 or 5 feet or 4 or 5 inch area, and let it regenerate. What you're doing is you're just regenerating new growth, but it's maintainable. The ticket behind all of this, guys, is it's maintainable. You can create it, you can maintain it, you can hunt it for years and years and years. Much like the timber design that we did, is if I showed you in the timber, if you do these and you can't maintain them, it becomes an absolute jungle, and then you have to stop at some point, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. You have to have actually spend a lot of money that comes back in with these mulching heads or whatever to create these open. So I encourage you to not create the tornado effect. Use these. That's why I use these. This is why I promote them. This is why I go the extra mile to make sure that folks know that if you create these the right way, whether it's in a timber setting or whether it's out here in a field setting, you can get the best bang for your buck out of these, because you can easily maintain them. You yourself, with a small tractor, with a hand tools, whatever that is, you can maintain these throughout the years. You create them. You don't touch them, obviously, in these situations, especially out in a field situation. You're not going to touch them for 4 or 5 years, because you want that woody browse, you want that growth. As soon as you start seeing this browse get too tall, and it's 6-8 feet tall, where the deer are not eating it, the browse isn't on the ground, you go through these and you maintain them again, and you just keep regenerating food inside these bedding areas. So yeah, this is how they look. It's not just a shoulder width trail into these corridors. These are 5 to 8 feet wide, kind of a thing. And that's what you're creating inside of these guys. Is when you initially make them, you have to make them, and you have to know going into it, you have to get something growing in there to meet those to meet that requirement. So that's kind of how they look, and how you can take a field and turn it into something that a lot of guys, most guys will overlook. So that's a recap on going over a little bit finer in depth on some questions that I've had on show me what it looks like instead of just a red line. How do you what does it look like from above when there's grass planted in there, and you say cut these corridors into these grass bedding areas? Is it just a foot trail? And like I said, they're 5 feet wide. You plant them. You got to promote growth. You got to get these browse. You got to meet these browse requirements. You got to get stuff to grow. Whether you're collecting. I've seen one guy doing years ago, and this is something I haven't tried, but it's when I have when I own the piece, I'll be able to do this and kind of make it the experimental farm, if you will. But what we're going to do, that guy was going out and collecting acorns, and they do the water deal where you've seen them putting it in the bucket. The ones that float are bad, the ones that sink are good, and you skim them off the top and you collect a bunch of them, and there's how many acorns have you tripped over on state land or something like that, where you can collect, or your privately owned piece, your leased piece, you can collect acorns for days. Throw those in those areas, get that woody browse to grow, And like I said, the coolest thing about these is you can maintain them. That browse gets up 5, 6, 7 feet tall, where it's just like when it gets past 6 feet tall, let's say, and you've got a stem that big around, or a tree that's that big around in a bedding area or a transition area, it's doing absolutely no good for the deer. Yes, they'll eat the bark, yes, they'll chew on it, but they want the top, they want that fresh growth, they want that browse when they're eating. And so you might as well cut it down. You can't hinge cut a 2-inch tree, obviously. Well, you can, but you're not going to get the regeneration off from it. So you go in and you take your brush hog and you mow it down, and that just regenerates new growth. And before you know it, these corridors are thick, and you've got that browse requirement met, and you've got all kinds of bedding inside of these properties that are in the right areas, that are drive-by properties. I need to do a video on how often properties with for sale signs are on some of the best hunting parcels in the county. And they're drive-by. You just look out the window. A lot of guys look out. Me, I'm not that guy. I'm the guy that you see sitting out there looking at it like, boy, 40 acres of a solid wide open field, not a tree on it, and but there's ag for miles around it, and every field has a deer, a rifle blind in it. That's the farm you want. That's that 40 acres that you can buy reasonable, and you can turn these into a powerful powerhouse if you know the proper procedures. And like I said, the more that I experiment and how to get what to get to grow in these areas, the timber ones are a no-brainer. Obviously, guys, you cut these out and they're in the timber. You activate, or you interrupt, irritate, I guess is the word I want to use, these the root bases in these transition areas and these corridors in the timber, and they start to regrow. You'll get popple, you'll get all kinds. The field, out in the field, is where you got to be tricky, where it's been hayfield for years, and you don't want them eating alfalfa in the bedding areas. You want that to be browse, so they're meeting the requirements up to that third feeding of the day, where they get up and move out. That's your huntable feeding of the day, where they move out into your destination feed locations. So that's what they look like. And I encourage you, anytime you make a trail in these switchgrass fields, that you make them intersect at some point where your blinds are, so you just don't make a endless maze out there, and you can be sitting in the switchgrass fields. Been on numerous ones that whether the switchgrass failed on a couple of them, or whether the the owner made trails everywhere. He was told that more trails the better. You get keep these deer moving, and none of them intersected. And he was getting trail camera pictures of a lot of these, and not just one guy, but a lot of them. They're getting trail camera pictures as they're sitting in the blind of deer 100 yards from them, 50 yards from them, and they never see them because that trail didn't come to the point of impact, is what I like to call it. So it has to intersect. You have to use that to your advantage. But that's what's inside of these areas. That's what they look like from above, and I'll show you some videos as we're going here of what they look like on the ground. And the more that I get, I'm able to have this farm of myself coming up here, I'm going to be able to give you a really in-depth look on how powerful it is, because I have a couple of them in mind here that we're looking at, and I know that I can make that work. And some of the ones that I have designed now and built for customers are working great as well. So keep that in mind, and that's what they look like. And so I hope that answers these questions that you guys have been turning in about what is on these red lines, how wide are these red lines. And this is as a design, obviously I've got to make the red line to create it, but it's not just a red line. It's a opening in the switchgrass. It's an opening in the timber. It's a transition area. It's a corridor inside the bedding areas. If you got any questions, guys, feel free to reach out. Thank you.